Hello, everybody. We are going to be working today on Chapter 11 in our book, which covers web multimedia and interactivity. I always find this chapter to be a fun one. Once you are able to start adding, audio and video to your web pages, it really kind of feels like you're getting somewhere. And I think this stuff is pretty interesting and exciting to learn as well. Let's take a really quick look at the learning objectives from the text. So we're looking at plugins, types of multimedia files, how HTML5 and some of these other containerized systems work, how to work with this old technology called Flash, and that's really actually kind of retired at this point. We also talk about Java applets. Those are kind of retired at this point too. And a couple of other things. So we throw in some of like the higher end HTML5 features that were added when it was officially released. So we have this thing called the HTML5 API, which has a whole bunch of different things attached to it. We do not dig into any of these things that I highlight here in any depth here in this course. It really is well beyond the scope of this class. But some of these features are considered some of the more important ones, and a lot of them, real frankly, were driven by the uptick in mobile usage when HTML5 was coming out, and they were really smart about adding these features in. All right, let's dig into the materials. So what's kind of interesting is in the old days when we used to get on the internet, and we were just happy to do that, right? Just to, get online, be able to click around and go from site to site and get information. Then people very quickly were like, well, this is really cool and everything, but wouldn't it be nice if we could play a little video segment or listen to a little music or maybe download one of those things or stream one of those things? And I want you to think about this. This is kind of interesting that you weren't always able to do that on the internet, right? So like we take it for granted, like one of the first things you do when you get a device in your hand is you're like up on YouTube or you're on Spotify or, like something like that, where you're listening to music, you're listening to videos, you're watching a TikTok or something like that. And we just take it for granted that that stuff automatically works. What is the reality is in the old days, we were just happy to get words, links, and images on the screen. And when we started to figure out that, hey, we could, in principle, play music and video through our web browser, that would be awesome, but how do we do it? And so what they did is they came up with what they called helper applications, or more notably, what we call plugins. And in the old days, for example, if I wanted to listen to music, I would have to get the right music player or audio plugin for my browser before my browser would be able to play the content. So you couldn't just go to a web page and there's the video and you hit the play button. You just couldn't do it, right? And the browsers did not by default come with those tools built in. So you'd have to, like, for example, I have recollections in the old days where we would like download Netscape, and then if I wanted to listen to like a podcast or internet radio, I'd have to go out and get the Real Player plugin or the QuickTime plugin, or and there was a bunch of them, right? And there was the other problem, that they had multiple plugin applications, each of which only specialized in its own like media streaming format. And man, you know what? It was a mess, because some of those plugins worked great with some browsers, not with other browsers, certain operating systems, not with others. And so you had this real mix of things, depending on what platform and browser you were using, with what would work. And it was really not great. It was, and it often didn't work well, and it didn't sound great or look good, So you had all these issues. But the concept was basically that you would take your browser, you would go out, you would download a piece of software, it attaches to your browser, and then whenever you'd click on a link that had audio or video, that plugin would step in and make that work on your screen, and that was called a plugin or a helper application. What was kind of interesting about that is what stuff worked in your browser or whatever plugin you use was relative to the file format of the media that you're looking at or listening to, right? And right now, we live in this modern era, and we kind of have like these standard file formats for like videos and audio, which in the past were not quite so standard. The truth is they're not really very standard right now either, but it's gotten significantly better. But I do want you to notice that this thing that they say here at the bottom, not all browsers support the same codec. So like, all right, so we got to backtrack a second here and like, what the heck is a codec? And so what's kind of interesting about this is a codec is basically a little acronym of sorts. It's not exactly an acronym, but it's kind of like a condensed word, which is a simplified way to say a compression decompression algorithm. So we take kind of like the first syllable from each one of those words. And here's the problem that we have. When we have a movie, let's say like you're watching a Star Wars movie or something of that sort, and you want like full high def with high quality audio, and you take that 2-hour movie and you turn it into a digital file, and you want to have a full movie experience like of super high quality, that creates a super huge file. In fact, if you want it like like HD quality or Blu-ray quality, you're looking at like 4 gigabytes or more, or 8 gigabytes or more for a 2-hour movie is about the average. Now I want you to think about that on your phone when you have a data plan that might only be like 2 gig or 4 gig or 10 gig or whatever, that you can burn your whole data plan by watching one movie. Not a good scenario, right? And you know what? Still kind of a barrier to a lot of people doing that kind of stuff on their phone. Now I know a lot of people now do have like unlimited bandwidth, or they have bandwidth that's unlimited per se, but it like steps down the speed, as you chew up more bandwidth. But the biggest problem that they had putting audio and video online was that back in the old days, if you want to like think about it like this, when most people were on dial-up connections, it was almost completely unfeasible to listen to music or watch videos on a dial-up connection, because it was a fraction of the speeds that we use now. It just was almost impossible. So what they would have to do is take that movie, let's say that might be a 4 gig or 8 gig file, and find a way to compress that down to something small enough that I could maybe transmit it over a connection that was not quite so fast. And so what they would do is they would compress it. They would reduce the quality of it to make the file size smaller. And then at the far end, it then has to decompress. And there's still quality that's lost in the process. And this is really kind of the big issue, right? So when you're compressing something and then decompressing it, no algorithm is perfect. Some stuff's going to be lost, right? Ideally you would never compress it, but you have to transmit it. So really what these plugins and helper applications did is they had ways of taking the original source materials and compressing them, sending them over to the internet, receiving them in the plugin, decompressing them, and then reproducing a reasonable facsimile of the original, right? Kind of like a fax machine, if you will. And if you ever looked at like a fax document, like, well, it's not as crisp as the original, but here it is, right? And that's really kind of a good comparison in my mind with the compression and decompression algorithms. The big thing that changed though when HTML5 came out is that instead of needing to go out and find these third-party plugins or codecs that you add to your system so that you could play the audio and video, HTML5 now had built into it, basically by virtue of the HTML5 API, a piece of software that can handle that for you automatically, and tended to be a little bit more universal than the proprietary ones that you would find. And so that was a really big move forward. But I will go back to this, not all browsers support the same codecs. I think most of these issues have actually been kind of resolved by now, but to some degree, it's still true. All right. So real common plugins, at least these used to be, right? So I'm going to say these used to be really common plugins. But some things have happened, right, since then. First of all, Adobe has eliminated Flash as a platform, right? And without really digging really deep into what Adobe Flash is, in the old days of the web when we were working with really primitive technologies, and we think Flash, we think Adobe, but the truth is it wasn't Adobe that was the company that came up with the technology. It was actually a different company called Macromedia, same company that also developed Dreamweaver, very interestingly. So they were kind of like the web company, and they had three products that were really pretty profound. One was Flash, the other was Dreamweaver, and the third one was Fireworks, which was their graphics editor, and all three in the early days of the web. So I'm talking like late 90s, early 2000s. Those are the products to use. Adobe saw that and ended up buying out the company. And so then Flash came under the Adobe umbrella, but Flash was the technology they were really going for. Flash was basically a way that you could write multimedia content for the screen and create interactive environments. So you could create buttons, you could write programming code, you could animate things, you could play audio or video, you could create video games. And so all the stuff that you couldn't do with HTML and CSS and JavaScript, you could easily do with Flash. It was basically a multimedia programming environment for the browser, right? And so this was back in the day when the web was not quite as slick as what we have now. So people would create these really amazing Flash things. And Flash became kind of a bunch of different things. And it probably the most important technology here, which is why I'm spending time on it, because it allowed a lot of people to develop their own media players, because Flash could handle playing the video. And then it also allowed you to build the video player. So if you can kind of conceptualize that. So a lot of the early video players online were really Flash players that would feed in the media. So all you needed to have was the Adobe Flash plugin or the Adobe Flash software on your system, right? And usually if you install one, you got the other anyhow. Now, what's happened with Flash, though, the problem with Flash was that without that plugin, you couldn't do any of the content, and in some cases you couldn't even see a website without the Flash player. Not a very great way to bring traffic to your website, right? So if somebody comes to your website, they see nothing and it says install Adobe Flash, and I'm not sure what that is. And then on top of it, Adobe Flash became one of those programs that became really annoying for wanting to do updates all the time, because it was always a security risk. Because Adobe Flash could run programming code, it could also hijack your system. So what Adobe ended up doing is they ultimately retired Flash as a file format, and seemingly as a tool for creation too. And here's what's kind of interesting about this is that product actually still exists. And you see me going into my Adobe Creative Cloud setup here, and you can see I have some stuff installed. But ultimately, Adobe Flash became a different product, and it became a product called Adobe Animate, right? So really, this product here that I'm hovering over right now, Adobe Animate, is Adobe Flash in its modern format. Here's what's really interesting about Adobe Flash or /Animate as a product. If you've ever watched the TV show South Park, right, and a lot of people are a big fan of that one. And at the very least, you probably have heard of it, right? And that's basically like a comedic cartoon show with adult themes, right? That's a video or a television series that's entirely created inside of this product. So that's one of the things it can do, is create animated TV shows, right? It can also create games, websites and applications for mobile, for desktop. It's a trip of a product. Really super fun to learn, by the way, if you ever kind of get into it. And when they switched it over from Flash to Animate, what happened is all the applications that were intended for web browsers, instead of being authored into the native Flash format, were now being authored for the HTML5/JavaScript/CSS format within the product. So you can still do all the same stuff, but now the output is basically a web application that works in any browser. So I think that's kind of interesting. And the product is still around. It's still really heavily used by people. There's guides, so if you're in the Adobe ecosystem and you're curious, it's still worth checking out. But that's not Flash anymore. That's called Adobe Animate. And we don't need a plugin anymore to see any of that content. It just works, right? That's kind of the interesting thing. Other plugins that people use really often, if you've ever looked at a PDF, right? So a lot of people will add the Adobe Reader to their browser. And if you look probably up here on my toolbar, well, I don't see the icon for it, but I have that one. It's in my browser. Now, most of our browsers, Firefox, Chrome, Safari, Edge, they don't need a plugin to look at PDFs anymore, but the PDF file format is one that was developed by Adobe, and we used to need special software to work with it. You'll notice I have an Adobe Reader, Acrobat icon down here, which is the professional version of the Reader product, which also allows me to edit those documents or create them. So I think that's kind of neat. Most of our better word processors and applications now, like if you bring up Word and you have a document, they usually have a save as PDF option. So you can save things to those formats. And this is just a question for both of you. Do you guys know what is so different about PDFs versus regular, let's say, Word documents? What's different about PDFs?
They can be read-only.
Yeah, Vidal, that's really kind of the main thing. Absolutely. And in fact, since most people don't have the creation software, Adobe Acrobat, because they don't want to spend the money because it's expensive. When you create something as a PDF, people can only look at it. They can't change it, right? And on top of it all, you can add locks and keys and passwords and stuff like that to the documents as well. So people absolutely cannot edit them, or if they can edit them, can only edit parts of them and not the whole document. So I think that's kind of interesting. Other multimedia players that were commonly used in the past were the Windows Media Player. So if you were on a Windows platform and you wanted to stream stuff, the Windows Media Player would have plugins both for your browser and for your regular operating system. So like if you would download a movie and it was in a certain format, you could watch it with the Windows Media Player or with QuickTime. What's kind of interesting is there's a couple of formats that Windows Media Player would never be able to play, and a couple of formats that QuickTime would never be able to play. So QuickTime would do great with Apple formats like movies, MOV files, and Windows Media Player would do great with WMV files, or I'm trying to think like what else it did really well with, but wouldn't do well with the Apple files, right? So there's that. These days, because of HTML5, we kind of don't need these plugins at all in our browsers. You will find that, Windows Media Player, I think at this point is retired, but older versions of Windows have it. And I think you can still get it as a download, and it's got some features that are kind of neat, like its ability to rip CDs or, that kind of thing. Apple QuickTime also still exists as a player and a format. But usually the browser is capable of doing those tasks now, at least on the web. All right, let's start talking a little bit about audio and video in terms of the file formats. And I will tell you that, so I'm using the author's slides here, and I will tell you, both as somebody who's kind of like, worked with, music and audio production and stuff for many, many years, that these are not very complete lists of file formats. What they're trying to do is hit highlights and expose you to stuff. But when we take music that we listen to, in fact, as you hear me talk right now and you listen to my voice, what you're hearing is my voice is projecting out sound. It travels in waves through the air. The microphone on my laptop is picking it up, converting it to electromagnetic energy, and then transmits it over the internet. On your end, that digital information is reconverted through all the devices and stuff in your computer, and then comes out your speaker or your earbuds or your headphone or whatever you got, however you're listening, back to a waveform that you can hear. What's interesting about audio is an analog format, by its nature. So sound in nature is analog. So in other words, when I make a tone with my voice, if I could look at it as a waveform on an oscilloscope, you would see that there's waves and peaks and valleys and frequencies and volume levels, and it's a waveform. When we work with audio, and so I'm going to kind of do some really bad primitive drawings here, but if we could look at, let's say like this is a graph of an oscilloscope here, and if I was to draw, let's say, the sound of my voice, it might like kind of go like this on the oscilloscope, right? It would create a waveform depending on what I'm saying or how loud I am or whatever. And those would be a combination of amplitude and frequency, volume and what frequency is coming out. When we work with digital formats, we have to take that naturally occurring waveform and kind of convert it into a digital format. Now, when you convert something to digital, something happens, right? So I want you to think about when you were kids, did you ever take like a book or a notebook or something, and then on each page make a little drawing, and then you start flipping through the drawing one page at a time, and as you flip from page to page, the image starts to move, right? Like you made a little like movie or something. And really what you're doing is you're trying to simulate what happens in the real world. Because if somebody's like, let's say, walking from one point to another in the real world, I mean, it's a continuous thing, right? But when I turn it into like a movie, and this is how, video works as well, it's really a collection of individual snapshots. There's a whole bunch of them, right? So like if you look at a movie is typically either 30 frames a second or 60 frames a second, sometimes higher, depends on the resolution. So that's how many individual snapshots per second we're taking to make that illusion that we're hearing something or seeing something that's continuous. The same thing happens with audio. So in audio, what we do is we end up taking what we call little samples of the audio, right? So over time, you can kind of think of it as like we're capturing, individual images one at a time. This is really a rough drawing, by the way, hard to do on a computer screen. And so we take individual snapshots of the audio and or video, and then as we take those snapshots and put them together and play them one right after the other, it sounds like the original smooth sound or video that was created to begin with, right? And these days with digital, what's beautiful about it is as long as the signal gets through and it's digital, it's going to be perfectly crisp, clear, and as beautiful as it was when it was created, as long as the transmission is complete, right? So if you have all the information, it's a perfect copy every time. What's kind of fascinating, and I always look at these things as kind of somebody who's worked in the multimedia arts for a while, that the digital, even though it brought something new to the table, which was this perfection really, in the digital format, it also lost something at the same time, because when you're taking individual snapshots, there's always an in-between that you're missing, right? The more snapshots you take, the more perfect it is, but there's still, you're taking a snapshot, right? So this is kind of the inherent problem with digital, is something is always lost with digital. So the higher the sampling rates, the higher the digitization approach, basically, the better the quality, the more overhead you have file-wise. So when you look at like that Star Wars movie that's 4 gigs or 8 gigs, if it's like a Blu-ray quality, You can also shrink that down to significantly less, but then you start to lose quality. And now I want you to think about this. You go to Netflix or Spotify or whatever, and you're listening or watching a movie that, you're not getting necessarily the best quality. If you have a high speed enough connection, you can get up to 4K on some of those services. But the reality is you're still losing quality. It's not quite the same as like watching it on film, for example. But these are the trade-offs that you make in digital environments. When we work with audio files, we do have some really common formats. So those are listed here on the screen. So a WAV file or an AF file, these two up at the top here, these are what we call full resolution audio. So in other words, there's kind of like a standard that was set back in the 80s is like, okay, so what's high res audio, right? And so they decided back then that it would be 44.1 kilohertz and 16-bit information, right? To be what we call CD quality audio. And so what that means, 44.1 kilohertz, is that there's 44,100 snapshots per second of the audio in order to get the resolution. And believe it or not, even when they came up with that, that's a lot of snapshots in 1 second, right? So like you're listening to 1 second of music and you're taking 44,000 snapshots to kind of get like the complete picture in 1 second over time. And even back in the 80s, some people were like, well, that's not high enough quality. We should go up to 48,000. And in professional audio, that's considered more of a functional minimum. If you really start to study this, you'll see that like when people do modern digital recording now, they're recording at capture rates that are significantly higher, like 96,000 snapshots a second, or double that, 192,000 is becoming common as well. The other aspect of it, the 16-bit, also has jumped up. So they've gone from like 16-bit to 24-bit to 32-bit to floating point, in audio production. And the higher you go up with all those numbers, so if you have really high sample rate, really high bit rate, that gives you more clear, better, more pristine, precise audio, right? Ultimately. And I think it's really kind of fascinating, because a lot of people really just cannot hear the difference, at all. Because why? Because they're listening on their phone, for example. But if you put it on a big system where you can really hear, all the frequencies well, you can really tell the differences. The problem with these file formats, and if you start digging into them, like a WAV file, for example, if I take like a song and save it in a WAV file format, like a CD format, it's not unusual for the song to be 10 megabytes, 20 megabytes or more for one song, as a WAV file. So they had to come up with different ways that were more efficient to transmit the information. So what they did is they came up, ultimately really with this format was the one that really kind of won out in the long run, which is the MP3, which is a way to basically get, a really good facsimile of that WAV file, but have the file be much, much smaller for transmission. So MP3 became kind of like this big standard for a long time, still is. So it for many people, it sounds nearly as good as a WAV file, but is much, much smaller. There are different bit rates for MP3s, and the higher the bit rate, the better they sound. They do have these other formats too. So M4A is basically Apple's version of MP3, which works with iTunes, right? So on your iPhone or iPods or whatever, if you're using iTunes, this is the format it's actually using, which is related to MP3. They come from the same grouping of technologies. You can see MPEG-1 audio layer 3, and then MPEG-4 audio, which is related to like movie formats. So they're basically using the audio from movie formats to transmit, is really what it is. They did come up with this other format, which is kind of interesting, and I noticed our author kind of pushes it a lot, as OGG being this this kind of new audio format that's pretty important. And what this one is this one's completely open source. What's kind of weird about MP3 and M4A is they do belong to the MPEG standard, which is the motion picture industry something or other. I forget what the acronym is here, but it was a proprietary format that everybody just started using. And in truth is a licensed format, but kind of like GIFs are to computer images, MPEG and MP3s and M4As are to audio, right? So it's kind of like this format that's proprietary. Everybody uses it, you know, but you know, it's not technically free, you know, but everybody uses it that way anyhow, right? Including myself. OGG is kind of seen as more of a neutral format. It does allow for higher resolution audio than MP3 or M4A, but unfortunately, not a lot of people use it. I mean, that's kind of the truth of it. The only ones that seem to use these formats a lot, and the related format called FLAC, are people who are kind of like audiophiles who share, like, you know, typically illegal copies of stuff at full resolution, and they'll save it in that format. So they can get higher resolution than WAV files and AF files, but they can range anywhere from like a low quality MP3 all the way up to, like, you know, studio quality files. These other ones, this one here, I would ignore, you know, because I never see these files, you know, anymore. Old Unix file format. And then there's the MIDI file, which is not an audio recording at all. A MIDI file basically is musical instructions on what notes to play. And so, like, a lot of you know, professional electronic musicians use this format to transmit music information, but it's not a recording. It's the instructions of what notes to play. For example, sending a pattern to a drum machine to play a certain beat, or to a keyboard to play certain notes. You can transmit that over the internet, though, and your computer will play it. Probably not sounding the way it's intended, but it's a set of instructions as opposed to a recording. All the other things that you see here are basically ways to record audio. Now, in the videos, we kind of have the same situation. We have these, like, kind of common formats and then not so common formats. The ones that we tend to see most often on the internet, frankly, are these MP4s. Probably are the most popular. You also see AVIs, to a lesser degree MOV files, and MPEG files. So straight up MPEG files are usually the really high quality ones. MP4 is to audio, or excuse me, is to video files what MP3 is to audio. So in other words, this is a highly compressed, transmissible format, and probably the one that you're going to see more often. You'll notice also that they have the open source OGG stuff that operates on video as well. So they have an OGG format for that. Also, once again, not very popular. And then you have, like, these new formats coming out where they have WebM, which is basically a codec format for all web content. And you're going to see, I think, more of these coming out. So you're going to see WebMs and WebPs for images. But WebM stands for media transmission. So it could be audio or video, but typically video. MP4 is still, I'm going to say, king. There's a few other formats that I think that are pretty popular that they don't show here. One that I use really often is one called MKV, because it's got a really great compression decompression algorithm, and so you can get much higher quality with less loss, and usually they'll be about the same size as an MP4. Get a lot of issues, though, when we start to use multimedia on the web. Okay, same issues that we have with images, and really with words too, right? The web is a format where you can go out there and you can download stuff easily for free in a lot of different ways. Sometimes people just give it out for free, right? Or people also have tools that they use to basically do what we call web rips, right? So where you're taking, like, audio or video that's streaming and you're capturing it digitally and turning it into a file. People also illegally download or illegally digitize. and you got to be really, really careful with this stuff. It is possible, to go out there if you know where to look and how, and I'm not going to go into the process of teaching you how to do that. But there are places that you can go and you can get like stuff that you shouldn't be able to get for free, right? And people know about these things, and they then sometimes download and watch, so you get like a movie for free or a record album for free or something like that. But you can also get in significant trouble for it. And usually it's not the consumption of the illegal media that's the problem, it's the resharing of it. So like if you find a movie that's shared for free and then you download it and watch it, great, but then if you take it and you share it to somebody else, well, now you're taking money out of the movie studio or recording studio's pocket, and therefore the actors aren't getting paid and the directors aren't getting paid and the movie theaters aren't making money, and they have lots of lawyers, by the way, and they will hunt you down. A real polite way to say it. So when you're out online and you're grabbing content, be wary of that. Like, so if somebody has like a free copy of Star Wars, don't put it on your webpage and say, hey, everybody, check it out. Go ahead and have it, right? You can get in big trouble for that, so do not do it.
On top of payload, too. I was going to mention cybersecurity purposes, too.
Yeah, Vidal, that's an excellent point. It really is, because, people are, we kind of went through this whole era of illegal file sharing a couple of decades back, really, where it kind of got out of control, right? We had some file sharing services. The truth is, a lot of those types of services are still out there if you know where to look, right? But it's not something that you should delve into. In my mind, media is so cheap now. Like if you subscribe to like a streaming service, whether it's like, Spotify or iTunes, or, from a video standpoint, like Netflix or Hulu or whatever, right? Disney Plus, perhaps. It's not really a lot of money to buy into these services, and then you get the content you want, and it's perfectly legal, right? And in some cases, like on, let's say, Netflix and Hulu and Disney and Amazon, all those services allow you to download the stuff to your device if you want and carry it with you. You can't keep it forever, but you can do those things, and it's legal, right? And so, the fair warning is always try to keep it legal. For whatever reason, this is one of the areas where people do get in trouble and do get fined and do get taken to court and get stuff taken away from them when they get busted, because the big studios that produce this stuff have the lawyers to come and chase you, So I always suggest to people, please be legal with this stuff. There is a lot of stuff that's out there, though, that is perfectly free and available, that's in the public domain. And I'm going to show you some places where you can get files, by the way, for free that you can use completely legally. But whenever you're going to include audio or video on your website, so this is kind of like my same kind of philosophy with images. The best image you put on your website is the one that you created, or you took the picture, or you drew it, or you created the audio, or you created the video. Because then nobody owns it. You can put it on your website. Nobody can say anything about it, right? The beautiful thing is we can take our smartphones now, shoot a video, record an audio clip really easily, and get it on a website and have it be completely legal. And there's not really a lot that you have to do to make it work either. That's the beauty of it. So always try to stay legal. All right. Now, before we get into actually coding, because that's kind of what comes next, I do want to talk just real briefly about some places where you can get media files, and we will revisit this. But I want to point out one that I think is particularly interesting, and this is about the time in the course sequence that I usually present this. But there's this website out on the internet. It's a very interesting one that a lot of people do not know about, but it's actually also a very important one. I want you to notice the URL is archive.org. I'll just drop that in the chat for you guys if you want to check it out. And if by some chance you already know about this website, great. If not, you can just sit back and just watch what I'm doing here. But I want you to notice the title of the website. It's called the Internet Archive. And this is a nonprofit organization that started with a mission, and this is quite a long time ago they started. I want to conservatively say 25 to 30 years ago. And what they put out as their mission was to, as their name implies, archive the internet. Because here's what happens on the internet. You go to a website one day and there's stuff on the page. And then 6 months later, year later, whatever, the people that own the website are like, well, it's time to update. So they update the website, old content's gone, new stuff is there. And then if you ever want to go back to the old content, well, it's gone, right? So we deleted that page, sorry, we don't have that picture anymore. And so that created kind of like this thing where it's like, if you were doing research, well, how can you prove it was ever on a website? So that's why, like, in the old days, people would actually print I like this page, I'm going to print it, or I'm going to save it, or I'm going to screen capture it, or something like that. But they decided what they were going to do is they were going to go out and create an archive of the internet. So on a daily basis, they go out, peruse websites for changes, take a complete snapshot of everything on the website and store it on their servers. Just think about that for a second. And what's weird about this is they have this Wayback Machine right here at the top of their site, where I can put in the URL of a company and look at a history of all the versions of their web pages since this organization started. So for example, I have Apple computers in here that I'm putting in. I don't know how this will load up. It does take a while because it searches a massive database. And then I want you to take a look at this. This is really a trip, you guys, right? So what you're seeing here, so we're currently looking at 2022. That's what's highlighted here in the timeline. And this shows all the blue and green circles here are dates. And you notice how many, like as I hover over this, how many snapshots they've taken on each day, like hundreds of snapshots on each day because the website changes that much. So what they're telling you is, what changes were made on that website. And so I can click on one of these and go look at the Apple website, from a few days ago, a few months ago, and specific versions that are chronicled by the hour. I mean, it's a mind-blowing website, you guys. Now, maybe not so interesting for looking at like what's on the website now, because I can just go there and look, right? But what if you wanted to see what their website looked back in, I don't know, 1998? It looks like they only changed it twice in 1998. And they have these days highlighted here, right? So I could click on, for example, let's say one of these snapshots. I'm clicking on this, and I will see what Apple Computer looked like, their website back in 1998, provided it loads. So this is like where it has to dig into its database, find the files, retrieve them. One of the things that happens with this website is that sometimes, like, when people like put images on websites or videos on websites, they come from third-party resources, so they're not actually on the website when you look at the archive version. And you can see it's taking a really long time to load, like painfully slow. All right, so there it goes. All right, so there we are. So this is what the Apple Computer website, and you see like how we're missing stuff, right? So the images aren't quite loading up. Well, one of them did. Hey, that's pretty good. So maybe if we wait long enough, they'll come in. So this is what the website looked like on December 11th, 1998. They were obviously gearing up for Christmas, and it's really pretty sad, but I owned an iMac that was the same color as that one that you see on the screen there. So I had that machine, believe it or not. Yeah. I did pay cash for mine, though, so I didn't do it on a payment plan. But it's kind of interesting because look how primitive their website looks. And, I think it's kind of amazing. Also, look, they have a little thing here where you can download the QuickTime plugin for your browser. So, hey, right on topic. What I find really fascinating about this is I have websites that I worked on when I was much, much younger, and there's snapshots of them on here. So I can like, if you wanted, I could like show you an example of like a website I worked on way back when and how bad it was, because I didn't know what I was doing back then. But the snapshots are there. But I think it's pretty interesting that you can even do this. So that's one thing that you can do at the Internet Archive. All right, so I'm going to go back to their homepage. So they archive most public-facing web pages and put them in a database so you can retrieve content and look at historical content on websites. What's really fascinating about that tool, by the way, as a web designer, if you're ever working on a website, somebody came along, tried to work on that website, broke it, you can go back to a historical version, look at the page, right-click, view source, pull the code down, and start rebuilding the website from where it broke. So pretty interesting as a tool. So that's the one reason I'm showing it to you. The other reason I'm showing it to you is the Internet Archive also became a repository where people share, we can call them open source, Creative Commons, fair use, no copyright ownership. So what you'll see here is that there's software, books, movies, music, recordings, TV shows, podcasts, slideshows, all this stuff that people just share. So like, for example, if you were really into music, and I'm just clicking into the music area, and then you can kind of like do a collection or search a collection. So, just for example, I know that this was kind of like a really big search on here. So if you're into the band, the Grateful Dead, and I'm not saying that you guys are, I certainly am not, but I know that they have a lot of stuff on the website here where their fans record them live and then post it here, right? And then share it. And then when I'm just kind of waiting to see if this actually comes back with a search result. All right. So here's all this stuff just related to that particular band. And so if I, just click on one of the links here, and I'm trying to get into some of the actual content so you can see here. So this stuff is all considered free to download, and so you can just come in here and play it. But the other thing that you can do is you can actually download the stuff. So I want you to notice you can pull down all these different formats. So if I wanted an MP3 version, I can just click here. I can pick the song that I want and download it. And I'm done, right? And I have the song, and it's completely legal because they're claiming no ownership rights over this. This is public domain stuff. So if you want to try to find stuff, here's a place. What's I think really fascinating about it is they also have like old TV shows and movies that are in the public domain. So like nobody owns them because the owners and their designees that followed them are all dead, and nobody owns the rights, so it's out in the public domain. And so anything you find on here is free to use with no cost and no reason to put stuff out there. So if you're looking for a source, this is kind of interesting. Heck, you might even go in here and find some stuff that you find interesting. I don't know. All right, so that's the Internet Archive. What I'd like to do right now is let's go ahead and take a break. We've been going for a while. Let's take a 10-minute break. We'll come back at 1 o'clock and we'll continue. All right, folks, the next part of what we're about to do here as we kind of transition in that PowerPoint. So if you'll notice, the next thing is starting to talk about how we actually get this stuff onto the screen and how it works and get to work with it a little bit. And so I'm going to get myself ready to code here. I am going to be working with Dreamweaver, so I'm going to go ahead and launch that. And I'm also going to take a look at my file management here just to kind of remember where I kind of left things off last time. And if I remember correctly, I was certain to put all my stuff here in my Unit 7 folder. Now we are in Unit 7 for a couple of weeks here because if you remember last week we did all our stuff with the contact form. So I have that contact form. And then we also have this need to do the multimedia. And so I think I'm going to end up probably doing that on a separate page. I think it probably is what makes the most sense to me. So we'll probably make another page to do this, unless I find one that's like barren enough. So I'm going to kind of like look around and figure out where we're going to put this. So why don't we do that? Let's just take a look at how the current version of my pages look right now. So this is what I have. I have my home page. I have my about, which is kind of whatever too, right? Not very exciting. Dragons, which has some table stuff here and a little more CSS stuff. I forget what I put on this page. Okay, so this might be a good page to maybe do this too. Or yeah, maybe the king is a good page to put this. And then we have the contact form. The one thing I did want to show you guys is that with the contact form, I did end up actually doing this. And I want you to watch, and I added, this is the JavaScript that I was looking for last week, and I'll let you guys see this code here in just a second. But you notice what it did. It automatically took you here and then bopped you to the next page real quickly. And I just want to show you the little code that I used. So I just told people, hey, you're automatically going to be transported to the home page in about 5 seconds. And then I threw in this little bit of code here. I just want to have you look at that and highlight it. So when they land on the thank you page, I have a little bit of JavaScript. Now we haven't learned about JavaScript yet, but here's an example, some example code that we have, basically moving people back to the home page after 7 seconds. I say about 5 seconds, but hey, give them a couple seconds to read the page too. And this is in terms of milliseconds. So 7,000 milliseconds equals 7 seconds. So it will transport you back to the home page after 7 seconds, and which is what happens when you fill out the form here. And you have to put an email address in and a name. So it comes here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and it goes automatically. That's without me clicking, automatically goes to the home page. So if you guys are curious about that's the code for it. You can screenshot that for your thank you page if you wish. I know some people will be kind of eager to do that. But now that I've kind of looked at the pages, I thought maybe the page with the king might be a good one to put our stuff on, possibly. So we'll probably work on that page. So I just want to have that kind of at the ready. The other thing I kind of have to have at the ready also is I need some music for the first example. So if you notice in the slideshow, they're just basically starting with an MP3 file. And I'm going to show you a couple of different ways to kind of do this. And this is a really primitive way to do it, mind you. This is maybe not the way that you would prefer, but it does work. And so a lot of people kind of use this approach. My big challenge right now is to find an MP3 file that I can use. I always have to remember I'm doing this for educational purposes, so I can use something proprietary. So I'm going to pause the video here for a second and just look for something that I can use. All right, so I searched around my folders a little bit, and I found some music that I might want to use here on the website. Let's see which one here would be a good one. Maybe this one here. So I'm just going to copy this. This is some music from Radiohead. It's an MP3 file because I know this is MP3 format. So I'm just going to copy this track from here, and then I'm going to move it into my project folder. And so now the one thing that's kind of interesting is, we start creating separate folders for images and stuff, right? And in some cases we do that with CSS and JavaScript and whatever. It's also not a bad idea to have a separate folder for your media, either audio or video or both. I'm just going to create one generic folder and just call it media, and I'll just put audio and video in the same folder. But if I was like, let's say a musician or a video artist or something like that, I might have like just a videos folder and then maybe subfolders within it, just to keep all that stuff separate from the rest of the website. I'm going to paste in my file. So there it is, pasted in. The one thing I noticed about it right away is that, okay, well, I have spaces and stuff in the file name. I'm going to go in here and adjust that. Spaces don't always work well on web servers, so I'm going to remove the extraneous stuff. So I'll keep the band name and the song name. I am noticing capital R's in there and a dash, and then I'm just going to lock that in. Okay, so that's the one first step, right, is to have the file. I'm including it in my folder with my project. I want you to notice something about it though really quick before I like move any further. This is an MP3 version of a song. As I hover over it, it tells me it's 4 minutes and 50 seconds long. It's a fairly high resolution MP3, and you can see the size of the file is about 11 megabytes. That is huge. That is absolutely huge to include with your website. So if I had a whole album worth of songs, it could be 100 megabytes easy, if not 200, very, very easily. And then every time somebody plays that song from your website, they're in essence downloading the whole song each time it's playing, and it's chewing up their bandwidth. This is one of the reasons why MP3s are often very low quality, right, on streaming services. All right, but I do have it there now. The other trick I'm going to use here is I'm going to right click on this, and I'm going to choose the rename option and highlight the whole file name. The reason I'm doing this is because if it's named weird or whatever, copying it right from the file name will make sure that in my code it's not incorrect. Now I know that Dreamweaver automatically fills in file names for me, but if you're not using a product like Dreamweaver, that's a really good trick for getting the file name correct, by the way. Back over in Dreamweaver, I'm going to be working now. I've decided on one of my pages. I'm going to close everything that's open first, but I noticed that I'm in my Unit 7 folder still, where I should be. I now have my media folder with the MP3 file in it. And I think I decided that I was going to work on this page here, the King. And I have these couple of divs that I have in here, and you know what? I'm gonna like leave those there. That's fine. I'm just gonna kind of move them down a little bit. And looking back now at the PowerPoint and just kind of how they're doing this, they're just creating a simple web link in this circumstance. So I'm going to follow this example. So I'm just going to link directly to the file, and then provide linkable words. So I just want you to see, like, this is kind of what they're trying to create here, something like this. So let's just put it in here. So I'm going to create a web link. So href, and then I need to link to that file. So it is in the media folder for me. So I'm going to start with typing media / paste in the file name, and close my brackets, and I can give it a title. Okay, and you can give more information if you wish. One thing that they're seemingly doing here is they're indicating it's an MP3, and actually, if you look at like the slide, they're doing that after. So they're saying MP3, and that's up to you if you want to do it like that. That's absolutely fine. I'll do a line break here as well. All right, I'm not sure how this is going to land exactly on the page, so let's go to the live view here and see what that looks like. Okay, just a really simple link. All right, let's go ahead. Let's do a save on this. All right, and then I'm going to go ahead and preview in the browser. So let's bring that up. Now you'll notice, because I set this up as a web link, it's not like the music automatically plays, right? So I hover over it. You'll notice down in the corner there that it's pointing to the MP3 file, and then I'm going to click it. Yes, turning the volume down. Just touch the little percussion. I want you to notice also what happened here, and I am going to pause the music for a second. So all we did is we created a link to the file. When we clicked the link, the browser engine realized, hey, they're clicking on MP3. They probably want to listen to that, right? So this is the HTML5 API kicking in, saying, okay, well, what do we do with MP3 files? I know, let's bring up the audio player. So the audio player that you're seeing on my screen right now is just simply built into the browser. I am using Chrome, right? So this is the one that's built into Chrome. And if I was to use the same, code in a different browser, the player might look slightly different. So every browser might have their own look for the player. I will have you notice, though, that it has all the features of a regular audio player. There's a play button. You pause it. It shows like where I am in the song, how long the song is, a little progress meter. I don't know if you're also noticing, but it also kind of pre-downloads part of the file ahead, so it's already got like a portion of it in memory. There's also a volume control that I can adjust, and then there's a control where I can download the file. So watch, I can download it if I wish, or I can adjust the playback speed as well. And this is actually kind of a new thing on the player that they added recently, but I think it doesn't take much effort. And now, here's the negative to this, right? We were on a page and we clicked to go to the song, right? And then the whole screen is just the song. And that's okay. It does work. It's kind of primitive, but you can convey the information that way. And there's not a lot of coding that goes into it. The browser just kicks in and plays it automatically. So I think there are some really nice advantages to kind of doing this approach. So like if you were a person that created your own music, had a bunch of MP3 files or whatever, very easy to put it into your website, create a link, people can listen to it, right? And they can even download it. Now, please keep in mind that would, in this case, we're listening to something that's recorded by professionals that have publishing behind them and stuff, and it is illegal for you to download and then distribute it, especially for money to others, right? Listening to it is a different thing, right? So a couple things that are kind of interesting for this, and whenever we're working with multimedia, here are some considerations. So the first consideration is if you're listening to audio, and the audio might be a song or it might just be somebody talking, it's not a bad idea to provide a transcript, right? And one of the reasons why people like using services like YouTube, for example, to publish music and video is because it does that automatically. It automatically adds transcripts. So like when I put my lecture video, like the one you're listening to now, onto YouTube, I don't sit there and type out all the words. I say, oh my God, that would take days and forever, and I would never do it, frankly. Put it on YouTube, it does it automatically. It listens to the voice as it's playing and creates a transcript, and you can go in and edit it if it's making mistakes, by the way. If you have a video, you can also caption your stuff. And so I think that's really kind of fascinating, right? And we have all these automatic tools that can do that. So that's considered kind of a normal thing. I don't know if you caught this other thing that they added here, because we haven't played with this feature yet, but with web links, there's a thing that we can add into them, and I'm going to demonstrate this. I think this is the first time we're looking at this thing called the title tag that we can add to our web link. So I'm going to go back to our code here, and inside the web link, I'm going to add the title attribute, and I'm just going to say the name of the band here, the song, and then I'm going to do single quotes here. And then we want to end the double quote. All right. So it doesn't want me to type just a single one. Isn't that interesting? So I have to come back here to get rid of it. There we go. Okay. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and save this, and then I'm going to go back to the live view of the web page, and I want to show you what this brings to the table. When I hover over this link now, watch what happens. So whatever I typed in the title tag is now a pop-up. What's really interesting about that title tag, you can add it to anything you want. So for example, if I go back to Dreamweaver and I have like these divs here, right? And I can type in a title. And I can add a title on this one. Let's go ahead and save that. Back to the browser. Right, so I added title tags to both of these two boxes here, so watch. Hey. Right? And so that's kind of a neat little thing. So if you like that effect on any of your HTML content, it's a really cool little trick, and it can be helpful, right? So like normally what would you put in a pop-up like that is information that helps people, you know, decide if they're going to click on something or what it is, or gives them more information. All right, so that's the title tag. All right, let's kind of move on down here and talk about and do a little bit of a comparison with what we just did with the audio file and how much of a pain it was in the past. Because all I did, right, is I just created a link and I pointed to the file and the browser handled the rest. It just brought up the player automatically and it worked. When we looked at like a comparison to how we did it in the old way, and this is not like you'll ever really necessarily go back and ever do this, by the way, but just so you understand how much we've evolved, right? When we used to do Flash, you know, we talked about all the little Flash things. So you'd create a web page, and then you would create basically a container inside the web page where you would embed the content of the Flash player inside the page. So you would have code like this, for example, where you're embedding Flash in, you point to the source file, you set up how big the container is, and then that appears on your website. And it's either an animation or a movie or audio or a game or whatever it is. But you had to have the player, and you had to use this embed command to create the container to inject the content into. And you had to have the software installed, all of those things. So it's like not easy to do, and didn't work for everybody on top of it all. So, you know, no wonder it kind of went away ultimately. Now, kind of continuing here on the HTML5 audio, and you know, this next approach I'm about to show is one that I think is a little better to use, frankly. So with this one, instead of using a regular link and linking to the file, and then once you go to it, it figures out, okay, let's have a player, right? This next one is where we use the tag that's built into HTML5 called audio. And I will point out the fact that there are kind of like two ways to do these audio links. And this is where I'm taking us kind of back to our class homepage here. So you'll notice I have this little posting kind of at the bottom of Unit 7. And I'm about to show you, you know, like both the simple approach and the more complicated approach. And the simple approach would be like the one that you see here. So you notice I have like the audio tag, the source, you know, and we'll point to the same music file. And then you add in a couple of other attributes, one's for controls and one's for autoplay. And then in between the audio tags, we put in a message just in case the browser doesn't support the format, what's going to appear on the screen. You know, that's what this would be. So in this case, I just put in a simple paragraph. Let's give this approach a try. All right, so we'll try this approach. So let's get in a couple of line breaks here, just to kind of move the content down the screen. And now I'm going to throw in the audio tag. Spell it right though. So audio, and then we have our src, which is the source file that we're using. I am going to use the same song since I have it handy. And then the two example things they did was controls and then autoplay. You notice these are attributes where I don't have to put an equal sign or anything. You just list them. What's happening with autoplay? If I have the browser back, I actually have to go in there and find it. There it is. It's right inside my product here. Boy, that was like double confusing. But okay, so this is kind of interesting. I hope you guys are kind of chuckling at that, because what happens with autoplay. So I want to just get that message in there. Your browser does not support audio. Please upgrade or whatever. Switch to a different browser or something like that. This should be super rare to happen these days. You know, really in the old days, you would run into browsers that can't play music. These days, I'm going to say you're probably not going to. What you'll more have a problem with is certain file formats not working in certain browsers. If you stick with MP3s, they'll pretty much work everywhere for music, by the way. But I think it's kind of interesting, because this is like previewing in my browser, right? And I did manage to pause it here, but I'm just going to refresh the page. How loud it is for one thing. But that autoplay command is one that I really, really, really strongly want to caution you guys on. Have you ever been somewhere and you go to a web page and you're in a quiet environment and you land on a page and all of a sudden the music starts playing and it's like blaring loud? Autoplay is really kind of considered unkind from a coding standpoint, unless of course you're on a music website. Okay, so then maybe people are expecting it, but generally speaking, autoplay is not recommended, and so I usually kind of eliminate that. I am gonna let it autoplay in this case, but for your own usages, be really cautious about this one. It's unkind in a couple of different ways. One is you can embarrass somebody if they're in a quiet situation. The second is it can chew up their bandwidth when they don't want it chewed up, right? So I think it's more polite to just give them the option to do it. But you can see that instead of having a link to go to the player just appears on your page. And I think that's really cool, and it's pretty darn basic. All the tools here are working just fine. And so you can find an MP3 of your favorite music, or maybe you already have something like that, or maybe you can create one for that matter. It can be spoken word. And that would be a way to add audio to your page. And this is using the simpler approach. Now I want to kind of like take a look really quick at the more complicated approach, which they're showing here in the book. And you'll notice that the major difference is that we are moving kind of away from, the singular source file to what we call the fallback approach, right? And what that means is we still use the audio tag to open and close. We still put in our controls, autoplay if you wish. There are other attributes you can add, by the way, like for example, you can make it loop, you can change the playback speed, et cetera, et cetera. But what they do here is they provide multiple files. So the thinking is this: if I'm in a browser that supports OGG, I prefer it to play that because that's a better format. Okay, maybe, this is an opinion thing. And then if that browser, for whatever reason, can't play that format, we'll then try this one. And if you want, you can create a whole list. So you can have like 5 different versions of the same audio file, all in different formats. And what the player will try to do is play the first one first. If it can't, it goes to the next, goes to the next, goes to the next. And if it all fails, then it goes to the third approach. So I'm not going to code this one through on the page, but I just want to show you the approach so that if you do have fallback files, you can do that. For the homework, the simpler approach is fine. Right. If you do, for whatever reason, like you're, let's say, a professional musician and have access to like all the various file versions that your audio might come in, and you can offer all of them, fantastic. Do the fallback approach. All right. Let's now try to do the same thing with video. Now, this one's going to be a little bit more challenging because I have to find a video. So, and preferably find a small video. And you'll see why really quickly. I'm going to pause the video here momentarily while I do a little file hunting again. So I found this little video footage that I shot just the other night here in town because they lit up the bridge to sparkle, and I thought it was kind of cool looking as I drove by, so I stopped, took a little video clip, because otherwise how do you see the sparkle, right? And now I downloaded it from my Google Photos. So I shot this on my phone. It's my own video. Downloaded it to my machine, and it came down from the Google Photo Archive as an MP4 file, which is one of the preferred formats. So I'm going to take this and copy it, and once again I'm going to move it over to my project folder, which I may have open here, right here. So I'm just going to paste it in. I don't like the name of it. It doesn't work for me, so I'm going to just change it to Sparkly Bridge MP4. So that's my movie file. If I double click and play it, of course it goes to the other screen. There it is. Not the most perfect of videos, but you know, it is what it is. All right, shot in the dark on a bad old phone. All right, so now let's use that same approach that we just used to add video, and you're going to notice that the techniques are really, really similar for this. And once again, I'm going to do a couple of line breaks in my code. And this time I'm going to use the video tag. I got to use the brackets here though. Use the same technique, so we'll have a source file. It's in my media folder, so let's go find it. There's my Sparkly Bridge. We can put a title over it if you want, but I'm not really too worried about that. But I think we do want to have controls, and I do not think we want to have auto. All right. Right, and I forget that my coding engine has that tool built in, so it starts playing it inside inside a Dreamweaver. It starts doing the stuff. So as soon as it notices a change, and I'm certainly not going to do that with the video too. But what I was checking here, or trying to check, is kind of how I put it in here. So you put in your stuff, but I want you to notice all the different attributes here. So the first thing is you can declare a width and a height for your video, which is a good idea, but you should know the aspect ratio of your video before you do this. I'm not sure that this will work for me, but I will try those. Couple of other things. So the controls attribute turns on the controls, so people can play, pause, turn up volume, etc. You can also put in a directive to loop, so the video just keeps looping, if you wish. And you can also do a preload, which means it'll download a portion of the video first before it starts playing it, so that you have some in your buffer in case you have a slow bandwidth connection. The other thing that's kind of interesting here is you can also put in a poster image. So in other words, you can have a preset image, so when the video is not playing, what shows on the video screen, right? And so it's considered a good idea to do that. I don't have one, so I'm not going to include this attribute, but you certainly could, right? I would caution you, do not use autoplay on the video either. All right, so let's see if we can put all those different things in. So we'll do a loop. We're not going to do autoplay, but we maybe want to do a width and a height. I don't know if this is going to skew the video or not, because I don't know what my aspect ratio is exactly. An aspect ratio is how tall something is relative to how wide it is in a ratio, right? And real common ones are 4:3, or 16:9, or 16:10. And all our devices, whether it's a phone or a camera or a tablet or whatever, when they capture video, you have to know what those settings are, and you can change them often as you're recording. So this is something you actually have to experiment with. I'm thinking mine's 16:9, which should work with 400:300, by the way. That is getting really, really annoying. You guys picking up on how annoying that is? So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to remove the autoplay from the audio, because I've already kind of reached my limit of patience on it. if you guys are feeling me. And it's exactly why I don't recommend it, just for one of those reasons. If you must have it on your website, you can add it at the very end. Here, we do want to have a fallback message again, just in case the video doesn't load. That's just considered good practice. Some people skip that though, real frankly, or they put in an image, or they put in links to like download Google Chrome or Firefox or something better than whatever the person's using. All right, let's save this and let's go back to the live preview. I'm going to go ahead and hit the play button so you can see that it put in a 400 by 300 window here. And there it is. And I did set it to loop, so it should just keep playing. Right. Your audio control, you can move along the timeline. You can make it full screen, just all your standard controls. You can download it and adjust the playback speed, all from within the player. If I wanted to make the player bigger, I want to make sure that I keep all the aspect of the height and the width. Same rules that you do for images. You want it to stay in its original ratios, because otherwise it can look goofy, basically. I'll go ahead and double each one of these so you can see the video just a little bit bigger. So 800 by 600. Let's save it. There it is already, but we'll refresh it just to make sure and hit play. All right, so you can kind of get the idea here. All right, so that's adding video. Now, here's what's kind of weird about video, you guys. When you take a look, that video is 3 seconds long, but yet is 2.5 megabytes in size, just 3 seconds long. So what happens when you have an hour-long TV show or a music video or a movie? The file sizes get astronomically huge. And because of that, it's really uncommon, really super uncommon for people to take videos and actually load them up on their websites. Even music, for that matter, because the files get so big and it wastes your disk space. I will tell you that in most modern hosting accounts, disk space is not the issue that it used to be. But in the past, you would often have a limit as to how much information you could store on the website. And more importantly, how much bandwidth people could download from your website. So like every time a person comes, listens to a song over and over and over again, they're chewing up the bandwidth of your website, which may not be what you want. So in other words, you're not only chewing up their data plan, but you're chewing up your own hosting data. And so what do people do? So like, how do you host a video then that's like a movie on your own website, where you could upload the file here and just create a link? That's pretty easy to do, right? But it chews up your bandwidth and their bandwidth. Well, this is why people use YouTube, real frankly, and services that are like that. And I think that's kind of where the PowerPoint is going to go next. So here's our audio, here's our video. Right. Now, you'll notice that the slideshow now goes somewhere completely different. And this one I'm going to talk about more with, in principle, I'm not going to demonstrate this one, but this is something that you can certainly follow through and try. But with CSS, there's kind of been this weird thing that people do with their menus. And I don't know if you've ever been to a website where you go there and you go to a menu item and you hover over it and there's a drop-down menu. And then sometimes these drop-down menus are animated, so there's like hover effects and they fade in and fade out or slide over or do things like that. And how do you do that kind of stuff? Well, there's a CSS property called transform, and there's another one called transition. So a couple that they're showing, these are really easy to use, by the way, which is why they're showing them to you. For example, if you have an object on the screen and you want like this image here, like normally an image would appear straight up and down, but maybe you want to give it a little bit of flair and give it a twist, right? Give it a little slight rotation. Really easy to do that with this transform thing. You would just add that to your CSS. So pretty darn easy to do. Of course, you have to take whatever object that is. So I'd have to find one of those objects here. So maybe I need to look through my website here a little bit, find a spot that would make sense. Okay, like maybe this image here would be one that we could rotate ever so slightly. So we'll go to the index page. Let's open that up. All right, there's my image. Right now, I want this to rotate, so I'm going to give it a class name so I can apply a style to it. And I'm just going to call it IMG ROT. That's just for me personally to remember. All right. Now let's go to our CSS, and then way at the bottom, that's where I'm going to put it at least. I'm going to put it, this is for a class, so we start with a dot. It recognizes one that I haven't applied a style to yet. And then, what was that syntax? Transform, rotate, and the amount of degrees. So we're just going to say transform. I want you to notice all the different options that are available, by the way. there's many different things. Rotate, and then we're just going to say 3. And I think it was just that, right? Is that how they did it? Yeah, just 3 degrees. And then we'll put a semicolon at the end. And then when we take a look, I want you to notice the image is slightly rotated. Now, it's not the prettiest thing in the world. If I go out to the live view where the screen's a little wider, you see that the image did rotate. So that's something you might want to play with a little bit, but that's a really simple one. So that's a nice one to demonstrate. The other one that's kind of interesting, and I want to show you, is this transition property. And this is one that you can apply to a lot of different things. So what they're putting it on here is that anytime they're on the navigation and you hover, they're changing the background color over a 2-second time frame in a linear fashion. And there's a whole bunch of settings that go with this, but if you just want to try something that's really kind of simple, you can apply it in this fashion. And what they're doing here is basically what you're declaring is, this is the background color I'm switching to. Which thing are we transitioning? We're transitioning the background color from whatever the default was to the one that we've designated here over the course of 2 seconds, and we're doing it in a linear fashion. I don't want to really change background colors, but we do have like this effect, right, where this hovers and it's an immediate change. I could transition that, and I'll show you that on the navigation. So let's do that on the navigation. We'll go to code view, and we'll find our nav a hover. And in this case, we're going to say transition. What are we transitioning? We'll transition the color over 2 seconds is a long time, but let's just go ahead and do that. 2 seconds, and we'll make it linear just so you can kind of see the effect. Okay, now I'm just going to go back to the live view for this. And now as I hover over one of the links, watch what happens. And you notice how it slowly changes color. I'm going to say 2 seconds is probably a little too slow for my tastes. And so let's see if we can find that same style here. Maybe we'll switch that to 1 second. Save that. And now let's take a look again. A little bit faster. It's kind of a simple but effective, kind of cool effect. Right, you see this on websites all the time, and you can use fractional amounts. It doesn't have to be 1 second. It could be half a second. Might be more appropriate. So, for example, in the code here, we might say 0.5 seconds. You notice how much faster that is, and that might be better, right? Okay, So that's an example of that. Other kind of interesting HTML elements that we could possibly use, and this is kind of interesting. There's a couple of HTML tags that are out there now that I think work pretty well. They don't really, and I think this is maybe a flub on the author's part. They don't really talk about how they work here. They just show like what they do. So like there are these detail and summary HTML tags basically that create these little arrow things that you can click on and it expands. And so since the author's not showing it really in depth here in the slides, let's go to HTML summary and details. All right, so here's an example, and I want you to take a look at this, how they do this. Details is the outer structure. Summary is the item with the triangle next to it, and then whatever comes below it is what it expands to. So here it is in a live view, and here it is running. So that's what that does. So that might be something that you really could use a lot. I think that's really kind of a nice little feature, honestly. I do see people when they are doing this that they often like style it in special kind of ways, but it's pretty intuitive for a lot of people when they see that little arrow that they know that it's an expander, right? Pretty easy to do. So that would be an example of those tags. Another thing that the book shows that's kind of interesting is a real common thing that we do on websites is we often have image galleries. So they're showing here an example of one way to do an image gallery. I will tell you I'm not a really huge fan of this approach, but you could use it. There are a couple of the case studies I think that actually utilize this. But basically what they're doing is they're taking a bunch of images in thumbnail form. So they have all these little images here and they arrange them. You can put them either in a list or a table or whatever. And then when you click on those, the larger image shows up over here. In fact, it's not even a click, it's a hover. So they show kind of the approach for doing that. I used to do these types of CSS galleries back in the old day. Not a super huge fan of them these days. The main reason I'm not a huge fan is because they do it all around list items. And you don't have to necessarily use the list item, by the way. So you can just actually have images that you're putting on the screen. And then notice basically they have a link to the main thumbnail image. And then by clicking the link, you go to the full size image. And then that just replaces that area of the screen. So kind of a neat approach. I wouldn't call it the best way to do an image gallery though, but an idea if you want to experiment. All right. What you will find is if you are going to do like image galleries on a website, that most people tend to do them with a combination of CSS and JavaScript. And there's actually, when you start getting into the JavaScript thing, deeply, you'll discover that people have like all these different JavaScript things that they've written where you can do that really easily. You just like take their code, drop in your images, make a couple of tweaks, and you have an image gallery. If you're working inside of a content management system, so maybe something such as WordPress, you'll notice that a lot of those systems have built-in image galleries of various sorts that you can just employ. In the old days, we used to code them out by hand. These days, it's kind of silly to do that when people have ones that are already pre-created that work. So why would you do that? All right, let's move on now to this part of the presentation where they talk about Java. And, so I was just talking, if you caught this, about JavaScript, right, which is a browser-based scripting language. Java is not the same thing as JavaScript. Right. Okay. And they have a bullet for that, right? Java is not the same language as JavaScript. They just happen to be developed around the same time. So they shared that first part of the name. And the reason they did that is because they figured if they put Java at the beginning of it, that people might pay some attention to it. And they did, right? And JavaScript now is arguably one of the most important languages, but it is not what we call a compiled language. In other words, we don't create binary files out of it. But Java, the full-blown programming language, many of you here will eventually be studying that if you're not already, is a full-blown programming language that can be used for a lot of different things. Because it's a full-blown programming language, it does not natively operate inside of a browser. And this is one of those things in the past where we used to set up plugins. So you would actually install Java inside of your browser so that you could go to websites and then run websites that had Java stuff programmed into them. This is now considered antiquated, by the way. You'd still run into a few websites here and there that have it, but most of our browsers these days will just block it for the same reason that we block Flash, because they are security risks. Because when you're running a full programming language on a computer and you're running it through a browser, you can actually hijack the operating system that's viewing your web page, so it is a security risk. So this kind of went away. 20 years ago, it was a huge approach because you could write a regular Java program, put the plugin for Java into a browser, and as long as the person had that, like with Flash, you could kind of do anything inside that window. So it was really cool, really powerful. Unfortunately, one of those things was you could hack the user's computer, right? And so that security hole got shut down, and now it's pretty much considered a no-no to run a Java applet, a whole separate thing. But if you are curious, basically what you do is you would add an object tag, you'd put in a bunch of parameters, and then you would actually drop in actual Java code on a web page. So it was basically a container for running code. Okay, so what happened is we had these tools. We had Flash, we had Java, we had all these different plugins that you could add to your browser to extend the capability of the browser. And as they would kind of go through time here, they would realize, hey, you know what? We need to add this stuff so that the browser just does it, so we don't have to have plugins and have security risks. But we need a programming language that can do that in the browser. And so that's when they came up with JavaScript. So JavaScript is what we call a client-side scripting language, meaning that it operates inside of your web browser. And it was originally added to add programming functionality to web pages. It has now evolved significantly where JavaScript, I want you to keep this in mind, not a compiled language, it's an interpreted language, meaning it just executes instructions, and it does that in your browser. So if you download a web page that has JavaScript on it, it will load the JavaScript and execute the code. Sometimes it executes automatically. Like if you go to like a website like Facebook and they're tracking you in the background, they have JavaScript that does that, by the way. Or it waits for you to interact with the screen to trigger the JavaScript. The neat thing about JavaScript is it has the capability to take anything that you have on your screen, so any HTML elements or any CSS elements, and it can manipulate any of the stuff that comes inside of your web browser, so it can change its size, shape, turn it on and off, make it move around, make it do math, make it, do things basically. I think it's really fascinating language to learn. It's a really easy language to learn, honestly, because it's very flexible. And the normal follow-up class, as we were saying earlier today, to web programming, this first web programming class here at Gateway, is to take the JavaScript class next, where you learn how to code in that. What kind of stuff did we normally do with JavaScript, especially in the past? You'd put stuff up on the screen. So you just put like you ever go to a website and they put a pop-up on the screen? Well, JavaScript is probably how they're doing it. We also used it to do a lot of different things. So like create animations and movement and hover effects and status messages and other programming like things. So like if we ever go to a website and you sign in, and then at the top corner of the screen they say, welcome back, and your name's up there, and they have the date up there and stuff. That's usually done with JavaScript. So it's kind of interesting. The real power of JavaScript kind of lies in the fact that it's an interpreted object-oriented language, and it can interact with the objects of a web page. And so when we look at a web page, we have this thing that we call the DOM, D-O-M. This is really important as you move forward in web, understanding the DOM, and just understanding even the acronym. But basically, it's what we call the document object model. So when you get that browser up on your screen, inside that window, that breaks down into four major areas. First of all, there's the document itself, so the web page that you're looking at. Then the history, or the pages that you've visited in the past, are also part of that. There's also the location, what's in the address bar at the top. And then Navigator, which is basically kind of like you could think of it as the properties or information about the browser you're using. So the DOM breaks down into those four areas. So we can look at the document and all of its objects, the history of where you've been, where you currently are, and what type of browser you're using, and operating system and IP address actually all comes from this thing. Most of the work that you do with JavaScript usually works around the document area. So anything that's on a page, any link, any tag, any image, any video, any words, any of that stuff that's inside tags is an object in the document object model, and therefore JavaScript is able to manipulate it. It can change it, transform it, animate it, etc. The history, and this is kind of interesting, I can, with code using JavaScript, navigate back in history. So like I can have a button on the page that says back to previous page without you hitting the back button and take you back to where you were, into a specific spot in your history. And then I can also change the location. So when you think about that thank you page I did before, I changed the location of the page currently, so I automatically moved this to the home page using a timer that was through the location object. The other thing that people can write code for in JavaScript is to probe the browser to know what kind of browser is visiting. So for example, I can write JavaScript code that says, okay, what kind of browser are they using? Oh, they're using Chrome or Firefox or Safari or whatever. And based on that, I can dish up different CSS or different JavaScript or whatever. So when a visitor visits your web page, and if you run the right code, you can tell what browser they're using to visit your site, and you can also see what IP address they're coming from, and that's built right into the browser. So I think that's pretty fascinating. All right, another kind of set of technologies here, and you'll see a couple slides on these, is this thought that, JavaScript being a client-side only language, meaning traditionally it only operated inside the browser. How could you use JavaScript to do the same kind of thing that Flash and Java could do, like real programming languages, which was to be able to connect to the server, pulling content and bring it back? So they came up with a way to do that with JavaScript called Ajax, right? And we really don't kind of call it Ajax anymore. We kind of lump it into, we just call it JavaScript now. But Ajax was basically an approach where we could run JavaScript that would leave our content on the page, and if you would click on something, it would go back to the server, pull in the information and bring it back without refreshing your page. And I want you to think about that for a second, because normally if we click on something in a browser, we're going somewhere else, or we're following a link or whatever. What Ajax allowed us to do is to keep the page on the screen and pull fresh content in without refreshing the page. One of the really good early examples of that is if you looked at email, so for example, and I'm going to just pull up something. Okay, so here's my email client, Gmail, and when I click here, I want you to notice all the stuff on the sidebars doesn't refresh. It clicks on the title, right? When I click on the title, it goes back to the server, finds the message, loads it up on my screen, gives me a slightly different toolbar here, but everything else stayed the same. right? That's all done with Ajax, by the way. So we're not refreshing the page. We're just getting the information we need on the screen from an outside source. That's called Ajax, right? Don't really toy with that in this class at all. In subsequent classes, ASP.NET, JavaScript, etc., you will play with these technologies. There's another technology that's really, really important related to JavaScript, and it's called jQuery. What jQuery is what we call a collection of JavaScript libraries that are designed to automate a lot of JavaScript tasks and make the code for them significantly easier. jQuery is another one of those things that, like Ajax, can be used to update content on the page dynamically without redrawing the page. And not only does it do that, but it makes the code that you write significantly simpler. The way that you typically recognize jQuery JavaScript code is there's usually a $sign in front of the code that indicates it's jQuery. What it's very commonly used for are some of the things that you see listed here. So slideshows, animations, handling, advanced mouse movements, or touch and drag, or pinch and zoom, and things like that. And it also is heavily used in combination with Ajax. So usually when you're doing Ajax stuff, you're usually using jQuery to do it. Some of the stuff that I learned the hard way with jQuery is just being able to kind of write this code really quickly and very intuitively. So if I want to hide something on the screen, the command in jQuery is hide. And if you want to show it, you show it, and then you just list the object and it does it, and it makes so much easier work than writing like JavaScript, where it might be like 5 lines of code to do the same thing. And that's really why it was invented. jQuery is a technology that was invented by Google back in the 2000s, actually, and really was kind of partially responsible for why Google kind of exploded the way they did. It's like, hey man, why is this like Google page so cool and everybody else is horrible, right? They developed this library to help speed up their coding and applied it really heavily. Like the email stuff I just showed you, they applied it really heavily to like tools like that, and is partially responsible for why we have all these like browser-based software products that just work inside the browser. Like, they're awesome. jQuery is one of the main engines. Now, I want you to notice here that they call jQuery an API. And this is kind of a confusing term for people that are new in IT, but an API stands for Application Programming Interface. So in other words, somebody went through and wrote a bunch of code that does stuff, and then all you have to do to use that code is understand like what the controls are to run it, as opposed to writing the code yourself. So if I want to take an image and do a slideshow, like this really common thing for jQuery, like you have a slideshow and you have these little arrows on the left and the right, and you click and it scrolls to the next image. If I was to try to write that by hand in JavaScript, I might be taking days or weeks to do it. But in jQuery, it's really darn easy. You just need to know the right commands to call in. So you're just calling in the keywords, putting in the image names or whatever, and boom, 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 it's happening. And the application programming interface basically means that there's all this stuff that's already written. You're just calling the right commands to make it go. And so that's called an API. So jQuery is basically an API. I think of it as a library of JavaScript functions with keyword commands to it. But that whole concept then actually kind of became part of HTML5. They're like, well, we're writing all these APIs to improve JavaScript, and we're writing stuff to plug in audio and video and Flash and PDFs and all this stuff. Couldn't we just like build some of this stuff right into HTML5? So that's what they started doing, and it works with and in combination with all the technologies that go with the web. So HTML, CSS, and JavaScript are interoperable with the HTML5 APIs. As they're kind of putting this book together originally, HTML5 was not a standard yet. and some of these slides kind of reflect that a little bit. But some of the big things that they brought to the table, and you saw this earlier in the slideshow, mostly driven by mobile, and I think that's a really important consideration, right? So everybody's getting a phone in their hand, and we're writing web pages for phones, and what are the kind of things that we need for a phone? Okay, so like the one thing is, well, I'm writing an app or I have a web page and somebody wants to know how to get to our store, and in the thing, I want to give them a map, and then I want to be able to give them directions. Well, they came up with an API for geolocation. So whenever you go to a website and a little box pops up and says, hey, Pizza Hut wants to access your location. Do you want to allow this or deny it? Okay, well, now you have a conundrum, right? So like in many cases, you're going to say deny because like, hey, I don't want them to know where I'm at. But hey, if you want to use your GPS to get there and get directions, well, then you have to allow it because they need to know where you are now, right? Or if you want to get the specials on pizza in your area, you allow it so you know like what coupons are valid in your area, not somebody else's, right? So it's not always nefarious that they do that. But before geolocation can operate in the browser, you're always asked a question, and the question is, do you want to allow whoever to access your location? And that's kind of interesting. Another thing that they, so that's geo locations. Now, I don't know if these links work anymore. I'm going to kind of click on this one and we'll see. So here comes the prompt, right? This, site wants to know my location. Do I allow or block? Well, if I want the tools on the page to work, I have to click allow. So I'm going to click allow. And I want you to notice what it did. Okay, so it's giving me an error message. It's not loading me correctly. But what's fascinating about this is it's found my exact location where I'm currently at right now. So like if you guys recognize any of the landmarks on this map, that's exactly where I am right now. Really super accurately. And I think that's pretty interesting if you guys follow the same link to see if it finds you accurately. When we do this on campus, by the way, we do the geolocation thing on campus. Not only does it find our campus location, but it finds the right building and in the right spot in the building. It's pretty spooky kind of stuff. So whenever you allow positioning like this, the browser can read your IP address, figure out from a number of different things, whether you're on cellular or Wi-Fi, the IP address, who it's registered with, et cetera, and they can pinpoint you on a map. So if somebody has your IP address, folks, and geolocation's running in the browser, they can send in a drone strike and take you out. They're not to freak you out, but also, right, like if I wanted to navigate with my maps to a specific location, I can do it, right? So I think that's kind of cool, actually, right? So a bunch of like cool demos that come with that. Another thing that was brand new for HTML5 in the HTML5 API was this thing called web storage. And in the past, before we had HTML5, the only thing that we could store on a user's computer if they visited our website was a cookie, right? And you guys have heard of cookies. They're round, they have chocolate chips in them, right? Yeah, bad joke. No, but a cookie is really basically a text file that when you visit a website, provided you allow it, and by default that's turned on, by the way. You go to a website, it stores a cookie on your machine, a very simple little text file that might indicate like who you are, when you logged in, what stuff you did on the website, or let's say like you were watching a movie or something on Netflix, so you go back and they know where to restart you, that kind of thing. But they're tiny little files. They could not do anything to harm your computer system, and the amount of storage was very, very limited. The way that we created cookies and read cookies was by using JavaScript. So you have to use JavaScript to write the cookie and JavaScript to read the cookie. The cookie gets stored on the user's machine. So you as a user go to a website, that website is writing a cookie onto your own machine. We do see now with a lot of websites how they give you the option, like which cookies you want to let them use. And I'm a big fan of turning off all the ones that track you, right? If you have a better browser, it can turn those off automatically. But when they added this piece, the web storage API, now we had a way to increase much more of the space that we're using on the user machine to store files. So for example, I want you to notice that they increased it, and I think they've upped this amount since it might be like 10 or 20 megabytes per domain at this point. So like you go to a website and they have permission to store up to that amount of information on your machine, and it's not just limited to text. It can be images, videos, etc., etc., etc. Can it cause security risks? Hypothetically, right? Hypothetically, it's possible that it can. But the capability is huge, because if you have an application that you're pushing through the web, and every time that application loads, it needs a certain piece of information, and rather than pulling it down over a data connection or a network connection, and it's already stored on your machine, it's going to make the application run that much faster and save a whole bunch of bandwidth. You download it once, it's on your machine, you just keep using it, right? So it's a really positive thing. So this is a really big step forward also. There's also kind of different types of web storage. So one that you noticed is local storage, right? So it just stores data without an expiration date, words, images, etc. Then we have what we call session storage, which is what keeps track of you as a user. So in other words, like the session information. So when I log into a website, how does it know what I've already visited? Or how, why is it that, I log into certain websites and they kind of recognize where I've been and what I've done, and other websites are not like that because they're attaching it to your session. So when you log in, a session is attached to a login, right? So certain aspects of websites that you log into are stored so that when you come back, your stuff comes up correctly. A really good example of this one, believe it or not, is Blackboard, right? When you log into Blackboard, you have a user account, and some of the session storage information, like for example, which courses you're enrolled in, are stored in session storage attached to your user account. And that way, when you connect to the actual live server, it saves overhead on the server, because it's like, hey, pull up these courses. You don't have to look for me and then look in the database which courses I'm taking and then run a query and clean it and then put it on the screen. It's already stored on your machine. That's the advantage of that. Another thing that HTML5 brought to the table, and this is pretty big as well, is the ability to have offline web applications. So in other words, an application that runs when you turn off the internet. Okay, once again, I'm going to point to mobile for being the impetus for this, because have you ever gone and downloaded like an app or a game on your phone? And here's the secret sauce, folks, that a lot of people don't realize. When you download an app on your phone or your tablet, most of the times it's just a glorified web page. That's all it is, right? It just looks like an app, but it's really a web page, right? And it might not have some of the web page conventions, but it's really basically a web page. And then think about some of those games or apps that you download. Some of them have the option where you can work in offline mode. So the whole thing's already downloaded to your phone. All the files are there, so you can do all the stuff you need to do, like play solitaire, for example, or whatever. And you don't have to have a data connection to make it work. And that's, once again, why they did this is because they figured people have the need to have an application that persists on their phone and doesn't require a data connection. Once again, largely driven by mobile. So this is kind of interesting for sure, but probably the one that maybe is most important and maybe also most difficult to learn is this thing called Canvas. The Canvas element is kind of the attempt in HTML5 to replace all the tools that we lost. So we used to have Flash. We used to have Java applets and all these things that you create a container inside the HTML space, and then you could run like normal programs. Canvas is the same kind of thing, except it's more generic, and it works off of JavaScript as the programming language. But Canvas is used to do very much the same types of things that we used to do in Flash and Java, which is create video games and interactivity and stuff that you cannot normally do in a browser. Canvas is its whole own field of study, and there's people who specialize in it. Probably the biggest area of development for it, frankly, is in video games. So a lot of times when you go to certain websites and you play games inside the website, really what you're playing is a Canvas game, which is, you know, written in JavaScript, works in a Canvas environment. The way that you normally do Canvas is through a thing like this. It's all inside of JavaScript, by the way, but you kind of create an area of the screen. It can also be the whole screen, but usually an area of the screen. And inside there, they have a whole separate code base that allows you to inject content. In this case here, they're just showing a real simple creation of a canvas and putting a few words into it, you know, and the code that's used to do it. If you are interested in doing that, you know, and the kind of the neat thing here is, like I said, a lot of people are developing games in that platform now, so that can be kind of fun, real frankly. I do have one of my former students, and let's see if I can find his web page here. Who, okay, so this is one of my former students, and this is his portfolio site, and he put this website together back when he was just finishing his web degree. This is about 4 or 5 years ago already, now that I'm thinking about it. Time does fly, right? But he created, as one of his projects later on in the program, this goofy little game, and this game operates inside of Canvas. So this game window that you see is a Canvas space, and then all the code inside of it is JavaScript. And I want you to notice here, I can click into the space, and then I don't know what the key controls are to make it work. Probably WASD, no, arrow keys, no. Oh, okay, WASD is it. So here I am moving. Oop, now I have to fight the slime monster, so I'm gonna attack. I better use something special, but whatever. This is all done inside of Canvas, just to show you the kind of thing that you can do. He wasn't completely original on it. He did basically borrow a bunch of code and stitch things together and made it his own, but it is entirely conceivable. But that's an example of a primitive Canvas game created by one of my former students. All right, just about done here, folks. You know, the bunch of things that we learned here today, there's a bunch to absorb, but in terms of coding, really kind of the two main things that we do is we add audio and we add video. Where I'm going to round up this presentation is to show you probably the better way to do video than creating your own, uploading it to your website. So that's where I'm going to go next. So the PowerPoint slideshow stops here, but I'm going to demonstrate for you next how to find and include a YouTube video. But we're going to take a break first. So let's do about a 5-minute break or so. So it's 2:18. Let's come back at 2:23. Let's call it 2:24, and we'll see you then. I am noticing here that I did not restart the recording, so it seems like a lot of the stuff that I just did about YouTube and stuff maybe did not get recorded. So I'm going to do a little bit of repeat on it. I'm going to do it kind of briefly. I was just showing people here, and I don't know where I paused the video, that one real popular way to add videos to a website, maybe the preferred way for most of us, is to find video content on YouTube. So I just used one of my own lecture videos. You hit the share button on it, go to the embed area, and copy and highlight all the code in the window here. Bring that over to your website, paste it in, and then what it does is it creates that space right here inside the browser. Now, I can't see it in that view inside the product, but I can see it here on the live view of the page, right? So that's one of the preferred ways to do content. It brings all the YouTube tools and features with it, which is one of the great reasons to do it. The other great reason to do it is it saves on your own bandwidth and server space. And you know what? YouTube's video servers and tools are the best in the world, so why would you use anything else? Is kind of my thinking, right? The other aspect of this, how we're actually injecting it on the page, is using the iframe tag. So there's a secondary example here of an iframe tag, which we'll probably demonstrate again in the coming week or two, where we can set up a window size on the page and feed in content from any external website. It can be an individual page, it can be a whole website, whatever it is that you want. Just a convenient way to include external content on the website. So fortunately I got that recorded in, and I'm sorry that I didn't unpause before. So, the people watching the video will probably lose a little bit of that content, but I think I summarized it pretty well. All right, folks, jumping back over to the core shell, this is our second week actually here in Unit 7. I'm going to try to return to my normal Zoom level here. So today we went through Chapter 11, Multimedia and Interactivity. The video I'm recording now will appear in this space later tonight or tomorrow. We worked through the Chapter 11 content, and basically the work that I did here today in class demonstrating code is the same thing that you should be doing, or really close to that, for your personal website project. So when I say add multimedia, you're going to be adding it to your website project for this class, whatever that is in progress. So for me, I probably should have found videos that match the content, right? So House of the Dragon, I could probably have found a trailer to add. Now, the reason I'm kind of like circling back to this is if you guys are doing a website based on third-party material where you're going out to YouTube and let's say finding a video, sometimes you do run into a problem, and the problem often comes with music videos or videos that are protected content. So if you bring it onto your page and you get some sort of an error message here from YouTube where it says you can't watch this video here, you have to go to YouTube to watch it, that's content that's protected by the user. The reason they're protecting it is because whoever posted it is earning ad revenue from it being on YouTube. If it's external to YouTube, they lose that ad revenue. So that's why some video publishers will block that sort of sharing, by the way. So if you find a video on YouTube that you post and it doesn't play, just look for something else. Now what I'm going to do is I should probably add a YouTube video that matches my content. So I'm just going to do a quick search here and say House of the Dragon, and I'm sure there's trailers, and maybe we should do episode 10 trailer since that's the latest one. And it's only a minute long, so let's just go to it. Right, so there's the content. Okay, so this is the one I want to share, just to review the steps for it, right? So I find the video I want, I hit share, I go to embed, and then I just copy all of that code. Make sure you get the opening and closing iframe code. So now that I'm copied, I will go back to my editor here, and you know what? I think I'll probably put that a little farther up on the page. Heck, that might even be better on the home page if you think about it, right? But I'll just put this here. And you can see they're going to give me a kind of a small player. That's okay. We're going to save back to the browser to get a live view. Just make sure I'm fully refreshed here. And there it is. And let's see if it plays. Crossing fingers here. Sometimes this stuff doesn't play, so. But there's an example. And it matches the content, right? So this is probably something that you could do. Now, this is a trailer, so it's probably not blocked, right? Because they want you to be excited to watch the show. But if you find an example, and maybe a smart thing to do is like, how about this? Somebody, who's your favorite musical artist? Somebody, call out an artist for me.
Bruno Mars.
All right. You know what? And he's probably right in this category. And so let's find Okay, so here's an official video, right? And it's from, and you notice it's from Vivo, right? So I'm gonna go to the video. This is how he makes his money selling this ad, by the way. So here we are on the video. I assume most people know this song. All right, I'm going to mute the volume. I'm going to hit share, embed, and then I'm going to grab this. This one I think might work. So let's just try dropping it on the page and see what happens. So I'm going to put this right below my House of the Dragon thing. Saving the work. Back over to the browser. Okay, so this is what you might get. So I kind of suspected this would be the case. So they gave you the code to embed, but they're not letting you put it on your own website. So they're detecting the fact that it's not on YouTube. And once again, why? Because of the ad revenue. So a lot of artists don't get paid a lot for creating the content, but they put a lot of time, money, and effort into creating the videos and creating the music. And they deserve to be paid, right? So if you ever, if you find a video on YouTube and it comes back like this, that's one that you can't really use. So you wouldn't, like if you did this on, for your homework, you would not get credit for it. I would want to see one that works. So you have to hunt for content. You can, I just want you to remember this, you can upload your own stuff. So whenever you're in YouTube, proper, and you're logged in, you always have this create thing. So if you have a video on your phone or your laptop or something that you want to upload, you can upload it and then create your own channel, for that matter. Something that you might want to explore. All right, that's about all I have to show you today. So I'm going to stop the recording here.